This podcast is made possible by the listener members of Nashville Public Radio.
This is the Nashvillager Podcast. It's March 4th, 2025. On this day in 1933, Tennessean Cordell Hull was named U.S. Secretary of State by President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And one of Hull's first big pushes in that diplomatic office is quite relevant to our situation in the United States right now, because some of the changes underway in the Trump White House are a direct repudiation of policies and approaches that Hull helped craft and establish. I'm Nina Cardona, and this is your daily digest of what's happening around Middle Tennessee with some historical context from Nashville Public Radio, WPLN News. To understand Cordell Hull's approach to trade diplomacy, you have to go back to a measure that Congress passed a few years before. It was 1930, very early in the Great Depression. People were desperate to find some kind of economic protection for American businesses and farmers. And with that hope firmly in mind, the nation's lawmakers passed the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act. It raised the levy on about 900 kinds of imports. It's got a lot of similarities to the way the Trump administration approaches tariffs now. And it backfired. Badly. Other countries responded by raising their own tariffs, so the price that Americans had to pay for items like food just shot up even further. The already struggling stock market took a new fall. Foreign investors withdrew their money from the U.S. market. Imports became even more expensive. U.S. trade with Europe dropped to just a fraction of what it had been before the stock market crash. And so, in other words, instead of alleviating the Great Depression, starting a trade war made it worse. Both of the tariff bill's sponsors lost their seats in the next election. So did President Herbert Hoover. Fixing that economic error was high on the to-do list for the Roosevelt administration as it took over. Secretary of State Hull saw what a mess the nation was in, and he also came to his new position with a point of view very much colored by growing up in Tennessee. You see, people in this part of the country had long been quite skeptical of tariffs. The North and the South were fighting over them during the writing of the Constitution, and those differences still lingered on into Hull's formative years. So he was predisposed to see the Smoot-Hawley Act as a mess from the point of view of domestic interests. And the really poor results of that measure had helped Hull see how much a sloppy trade policy could damage international relations of all kinds. But simply rolling back the tariff increases of 1930 wouldn't solve the problem. Things have become far too complicated for that. So Hull developed a concept that has become the international norm: reciprocal trade agreements. In 1934, Congress gave the go-ahead for FDR and Hull to negotiate trade agreements with other countries where they decided on tariffs in conversation with each other, rather than playing the tit-for-tat game of one raising the levy and the other returning the favor, if you will. And it gave the administration the right to grant another nation most favored nation trading status. Hull's actions, combined with the London Economic Forum of 1933, set the stage for what would coalesce after World War II into the GATT, General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade. And the World Trade Organization that we know today grew out of the GATT. In just a few minutes, a conversation about how Tennessee's threats of mass violence in schools law has created unintended consequences. That's coming up after the newscast.
We know that local government isn't the only part of your life.
Like the mayor, I know that city government isn't the only thing you're concerned with.
We are still struggling to find affordable housing.
Particularly with this bus stop.
That's one of the unique challenges with my business.
I'm WPLN's Metro reporter Cynthia Abrams. I'm working to break down topics like transit, housing, and local government to make sure that when you are thinking about Metro, you're getting the full story. Follow my latest stories at WPLN.org.
Here's the latest from WPLN News. Tennessee is scheduled to carry out its first lethal injection in 5 years this spring. The state Supreme Court is responsible for setting execution dates. It's scheduled 4 executions this year. According to the Tennessee in the First, a man named Oscar Franklin Smith is expected to die on May 22nd. The state of Tennessee held off on administering the death penalty after an investigation found systemic issues in its lethal injection protocol. The Department of Correction released a new protocol in December. It's a single drug process using the sedative phenobarbital. Although this process is less controversial than the former 3-drug protocol, it still carries a high risk of lung damage and the sensation of drowning. Lawmakers in the Tennessee House have approved a bill to ban cell phones in schools. Representative Rebecca Alexander is the sponsor. She says Americans have become reliant on instant information and says, quote, "We just need to stop and let students be students." The law would give schools some latitude in how to restrict cell phones. They can be silenced in students' pockets or turned off in backpacks. School districts across the country have experimented with cell phone bans in the last few years. Last fall, Warren County in Tennessee went even further than the law would mandate, requiring students to put their phones in high-tech pouches that would only unlock at the end of the school day. Some parents say they're concerned about not hearing from their children in emergencies if their phones are out of reach. One grandmother of a student at Antioch High School told News Channel 5 she was relieved to get a call from her granddaughter during January's shooting at the school. In the Senate, the bill has approval of the Education Committee and is headed towards a floor vote. An appeals court has ruled that the Clarksville-Montgomery County school system failed to properly educate a former student. He graduated high school with a 3.4 grade point average. However, his family claimed in a lawsuit that he could not read or spell his own name. The court awarded him compensatory education hours post-graduation, which will be provided through tutoring. The lawsuit further claims that his individualized education plan was not tailored to the dyslexia diagnosis he received in 11th grade. The student's parents filed a complaint under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act that the school system did not provide him with a free and appropriate education. The former student used AI technology like ChatGPT to write papers, which the court found did the work for him. It further held that his education plan did not aim to help him learn to read, thus failing to properly educate him. The very character of downtown Nashville, like the old brick honky-tonks of Lower Broadway, could be in danger. WPLN Cynthia Abrams reports that's because new measures, both at the state and city levels, could upend how historic buildings are preserved.
There are 2 different actions at play. On a local level, Nashville's Metro Council is considering a bill that would move the Historic Zoning Commission under the city's planning department. It sounds technical, but this kind of zoning oversight is still stirring up debate. Ellen Hurd, with the nonprofit Historic Nashville, spoke against the change.
Placing responsibility for making those decisions in a historical context adds an additional layer of complexity, which we fear will be ignored or dismissed if the Historic Zoning Commission is absorbed. Our city will suffer as a result.
One of the reasons the council is even considering this is because the state is looking to gut local oversight of historic buildings. They may remove any say that local commissions have over buildings in a so-called tourist development zone. In Nashville, that includes basically all of downtown. Mayor Freddie O'Connell hopes the state bill will be dropped if the council moves the commission.
I think the sense is that if we can demonstrate an approach to the regulatory side of what Metro Historic's function has been, we still think that we can avoid regulatory preemption.
Still, many are not on board. The council bill is up for second consideration, and what could be a heated discussion tonight. Cynthia Abrams, WPLN News.
The Rutherford County property assessor will face questioning by state officials today. Rob Mitchell reported numerous incorrect details about property taxes, then failed to correct them when asked by the state, according to Tennessee Comptroller Jason Mumpower. The Daily News Journal reports these errors include charging people incorrect tax amounts for newly constructed buildings and labeling a large school building as a residential property. Mitchell, who was reelected in 2024, denies these allegations. Tariffs, declining sales, and recent layoffs at big spirit producers have the future of the bourbon industry in question. From our partner station, Louisville Public Media, Bria Jones reports that people working in bourbon say its saving grace is a human connection.
As bourbon sales rose over the last decade, so did the tourism side of the industry. The Kentucky Bourbon Trail expanded, as did distillery experiences in Louisville. Eddie Fieldhouse runs a company that helps connect tourists with bourbon experiences. He says as the industry faces challenging times, human interaction with distillery workers will be key.
They can meet people that they would not have met otherwise. And that's beautiful. Human connection's never going to go away.
Fieldhouse is confident the industry will survive its current financial hardships. He says the ones hurt most will be the working class people who create the barrels, age the bourbon, and welcome people to the Bourbon Trail. I'm Bria Jones in Louisville.
That story comes to us through the Appalachian Mid-South newsroom. You'll find more news anytime at WPLN.org. Tennessee is grappling with how to keep kids safe, evaluate threats, and when to take action. But are the state's laws striking the right balance? While legislators and members of the public wrestle with this exceedingly difficult problem, laws are being passed that have unintended consequences for children with disabilities and their families. Zoe Jamail, Policy Coordinator for Disability Rights Tennessee, joined This Is Nashville host Khalil Ekalona for a call-in episode about Tennessee's threats of mass violence laws. Here's an excerpt.
Now, Zoe, under Tennessee law, the penalty for threatening violence in schools has become harsher over the years. Last summer, it was made into a felony offense. Tell us about how these laws are impacting kids with disabilities specifically.
Yeah, thanks for that question. One of the problems with talking about exact numbers in terms of how this is impacting students with disabilities is we don't have data. There's no data in Tennessee related to the impact of threats of mass violence on this population. And so it's hard to say exactly how many students with disabilities have been arrested. But we do have some data out of one county that gives a bit of a picture of how this is impacting students with disabilities disproportionately. There, in the first 6 weeks of the 2024 to 2025 school year, in this particular county, there were 18 children arrested for a threat of mass violence on school property. 1/3 of those students have disabilities, and that's more than double the proportion of students with disabilities across the district. So that tells you that this really is impacting students with disabilities disproportionately.
All right, we're going to go to take some phone calls. I've got Keith in Manchester. Keith, thank you for calling. What do you want to share with us?
Yes, my sixth grader was saying that he was going to cause violence to a school, and apparently it was on a social media post. And I was told to gather the evidence for them and then give it back to the school. And this is a felony, and the kid is not even told that he has the right against self-incrimination. But interestingly enough, the next day when I went to the school, they said, well, what did you find? And I said, I found nothing. And they said, well, never mind. We didn't find anything either. So apparently a student's mother said, oh, I think that's named my kid on this post. And my kid wasn't even on that social media feed.
That's interesting. How did you react when the school told you that, hey, we didn't find anything?
It was like, okay, why did I go through all of this? We went through some really tough night there, and there was a mass email to all the parents that a threat's been made to the school, and law enforcement has been notified. I thought that the police are going to show up any time, and it was a traumatic. And all I got was never mind, I'm sorry.
Yeah. How's your sixth grader doing now?
Well, we put him in a new school now, so he's exonerated. They said no, they had no evidence of him doing anything. Some parent just said that, and I couldn't get the whole story.
Is he happy in his new school?
Well, not really. He'd rather be back in his old school.
Yeah. Well, I hope things turn around for him and your family. Really appreciate you giving us a call, Keith.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Okay, we're going to go to Carla in Gallatin. Carla, thank you for calling. What do you want to share?
Yeah, I just was wondering, the bill that's passed and being utilized, and in regards to the specific discussion about this happening to children with disabilities, why is it that it has to be such a black and white law? Why can't they add a provision onto the law stating, like, if there is evidence of this being part of a child with disabilities, that definitely has implications. And I think that it's so important to take that into consideration that it's hard to believe that they can't add some kind of provision onto the law.
Zoe?
That's my comment.
Thank you for sharing that, Carla. Zoe?
Yeah, thank you for that. I think a lot of advocates have the same, mentality about what the law should include when it comes to protections for students with disabilities. And those concerns have been relayed to members of the legislature. It seems that right now they are unwilling to touch the threats of mass violence law and address any of the implementation issues that we've been seeing. But I do know that there is at least acknowledgement that they might need to do something about the law and how it's written at some point in the future.
That was Zoe Jamail from Disability Rights Tennessee speaking on WPLN's daily show This Is Nashville with host Khalil Ekalona, and you can hear their entire conversation in the This Is Nashville podcast feed. Thanks for listening to the Nashvillager podcast. We take this look at Nashville news every weekday. If you like it, go ahead and subscribe on your favorite podcasting app and tell a friend or give us a mention on your socials. It really helps get the word out. And of course, everything at WPLN News is listener supported. You can become a member at WPLN.org. And that's it for today. Thanks so much for listening. Let's make this day a good one, and we'll catch back up tomorrow.